Welcome to the book of Nahum, the next minor prophet. I hate to call them minor prophets because if I run across Nahum in heaven and I say, he says, why did you call me a minor prophet? If God speaks to somebody to tell other peoples about him, what doesn't make him a minor prophet? It makes him a major prophet. It's just that they call them the minor prophets because the books, these 12 so-called minor prophets, are much smaller than the prophecies or the books of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. So we're going to go through Nahum. Now, talking about these different prophets, I made a graph here, and as you can see, it has to do with the prophets. This is at the time of the kings that we are in with the minor prophets, and it gives an idea of what's going on with all these prophets. Now, there's no kings mentioned in any of these books. Jonah, but we can see it was probably before the end of Israel because he went to Nineveh. Joel, at the end of Israel, and then Nahum before the end of Israel, which we're in now. Obadiah was late kings. Habakkuk was late during the last of the kings. And then Malachi would have been probably the last one. None of these have any time frame, and now we go in here, and I'll put timeline key, and as we go through this, we'll bring this all out and expound on it, maybe a special video just on the prophets and add all the prophets in the Bible. But then it goes into the kingdoms where these people are mentioned: Ahab, kings of Israel, and then Elisha, and then Isaiah was there during Uzziah and Jeroboam when the two were reigning, and then Israel ended, and then Isaiah to Hezekiah, and also at the same time was Hosea and Amos, and then Manasseh and Ammon, those kings of Judah, no one mentioned. Then Jeremiah, all the way down to Zedekiah, the end of Judah. Daniel, then he went into the captivity. Ezekiel was in the captivity. Haggai and Zechariah, then the return. Ezra and Nehemiah. So we will go through this more in depth a little bit later at the beginning of most of the rest of the books. Now we'll go back to our text. I'll read a little in the Greek, and then we'll go through the book of Nahum. Lima Ninevi Vivlion Horatios Nahum to Elkaseu Theos Zelotis ke ektikon Evrios ektikon Kyrios metathimu ektikon Kyrios tous Epanantius avtu ke exaeron avtos tous ecthrus avtu. Concern for Nineveh. So this brings us to probably the time before the fall of Israel. And then it mentions in Nineveh, we see that in our next map here. Here's Nineveh in the Mesopotamian area on the eastern side of the Tigris River. The Ninevites, they went all around this whole world. They were called the Assyrians, basically, and this is where Nineveh was. Now we know that previously Jonah was sent to Nineveh, and they repented. And Jesus mentions even this in Matthew 12:41, where it says, "Men of Nineveh will rise up in the judgment with this generation," that was the ones in Capernaum and there and didn't believe in Jesus, "and they'll condemn it. For they repented at the proclamation of Jonah, and behold, a greater than Jonah is here." Nineveh today is was pretty much leveled, and it's part of the city of Mosul in Iraq. And Nineveh fell in 612 BC, pretty much at the end of the time of Israel, where Israel fell. Then we'll go into more of that, and we'll see what it says here in Zephaniah 2:12. It says, "And you, O Ethiopians, are slain of my slain broadsword, and he will stretch out his hand against the north and will destroy Assyria, and will establish Nineveh for a waterless extinction," which it pretty much was, as a wilderness. "And flocks shall feed in the midst of her, even all the wild beasts of the earth, chameleons and hedgehogs shall make a bed in her fretwork, and wild beasts sound out loud in her ditches, and crows in her gatehouses, for her height was as the cedar. This is the heedless city, dwelling upon hope, who says in her heart, I am, and there is not after me any longer. Oh, how it was for extinction, a pasture of wild beasts. Everyone traveling through her shall whistle and shake his head." So Nineveh will be destroyed, and this is what Nahum is talking about. And verse 2, it continues, God is a jealous God, and the Lord is punishing. The Lord is punishing with rage. The Lord is punishing his adversaries and lifting away himself of his enemies. Now, here we go into the next couple of chapters. We get into what I call the duality of God. God is jealous, punishing with rage, and then in verse 3, the Lord is lenient, and great is his strength, and the Lord will not acquit one as innocent. His way is by consummation and by a rumbling, and the clouds of his feet are as of the dust of his feet, pressing together the sea and drying it, and making desolate all the rivers. Bashan and Carmel are lessened, and the blossoming of Lebanon failed. So the duality of God punishing, loving, are full of mercy. Which one do we want? Well, of course, I want the loving God, not the punishment. But we'll get into more here into this as we go through. But right now, I see Bashan and Carmel. Now I have a map here. And city of Carmel is right by Hebron down here. It's not Mount Carmel, but Carmel, where I think this is later on with Samuel. And then Bashan is what's called the Golan Heights. Today, here's Bashan it's in Israel now, but it was in Syria. So Bashan and Carmel and the blossoming of Lebanon failed. So this is probably because of this Assyrians coming down and destroying everybody. And then it continues in 5, the mountains shake from him, and the hills are shaken. And this is, I believe, God. And the earth rises upwards from his presence, the whole, and all the ones dwelling in it. From in front of his anger, who shall stand, and who shall withstand in the anger of his rage? We have orgi and thimu, anger of rage, and that's really bad. When sometimes it's just the anger or thimu by themselves. Here we have themos, the same word. His rage melts away sovereignties, and the rocks are broken because of him. But then gracious is the Lord to the ones waiting on him in a day of affliction, and he is knowing of the ones venerating him. Now, this is where I want to be, in 1:7. I can write that down and say, Lord, I want to be with the people of the book of Nahum 1:7, not the ones of 1:6. And by a flood coursing, he shall execute a consummation of the ones rousing up, and darkness shall pursue his enemies. What do you devise against the Lord? People that are against God, it's just like committing suicide, really. It's worse than committing suicide because you're putting yourself in harm's way for eternity. And who wants to be someplace that you can never get out? Imagine if you were really sick, you hurt yourself, but you know you're going to get healed. Or if you're sick, you're either going to get better or you're going to die and you think it's going to be over. But what happens if you're sent to a place, and God is able to do that, because Jesus warns us many places where the fire does not quenched. The place that you were hurting, but you could never get away from the hurt. And God can keep you alive. He's made us. We just didn't come by accident from out of our mother. God created us from the womb, put the DNA, the instructions and everything. When it's over, where we go is going to be way more important than anything in this world. You can sit here and worry about all sorts of things in this world, and we all do, but the thing to really worry about is where I'm going to be when I'm not in this world. That is going to be eternal, way more than anything in this world that can come to an end or be healed or stopped or get out of jail. All these things, there's no getting out of jail. Whatever God has planned for the unbelievers is going to be horrible. And a person doesn't have to go. They're sending themselves there by ignoring God. It continues in verse 9, what do you devise against the Lord? He himself will make a consummation. He will not punish twice for the same thing by affliction. That means it's it. That's it. And there's no double jeopardy with God. You don't go to him twice and get condemned twice. Once the judgment is, that's it. No going back. No getting away from the judgment of God. Verse 10, for the enemy will be made barren unto his foundation, and as a yew tree being twisted he shall be devoured, and as stubble he shall be dried up full. Probably talking about Nineveh. And from out of you shall come forth a device against the Lord. Nineveh, which this Assyrian king's planned. Out of you, I believe, is Nineveh, and is planning wicked things adverse to him. Thus says the Lord, who rules many waters, that is, many nations, and so they shall be drawn apart, and the report of you, that is, the report of Nineveh coming, shall not be listened to attentively any longer, because Nineveh will cease. And now I will break his rod from you, in you being either Israel, Judah, or us, spiritually, and the bonds I will tear up. Assyria, Nineveh, well, this was everything that Nineveh conquered, all the way down into Egypt. They came across the Fertile Crescent through Israel, conquered Israel, went down over and conquered Egypt, a very powerful nation. And it was ruled basically the Neo-Assyrian era, which this is, from 1200 was Shalmaneser, then Sargon, 722, Sennacherib, 700, Esarhaddon, 669, and Ashurbanipal in 627. And the Medes over here, with the Scythians up north, the Babylonians down south, and the Persians in the southern part where Iran is today, they all attacked Nineveh, and it was sacked in 612. Now going back to our text, 14, and the Lord shall give charge concerning you, saying, there shall not be sown the report of your name any longer from out of the house of your God. And the house of the god of Nineveh was Ishtar, and Ishtar some people think Easter comes from Ishtar. It's a possibility. but their name of Nineveh will no longer be. And he says, I will utterly destroy the carved images and the molten images, and I will establish for your burial, and that quickly. And now an interesting insertion here, which was quoted by Paul in Romans 10:15, where it talks about how can you understand anything about Jesus unless you have been called upon? And if you have not heard, then how can you hear unless one is sent? And this is what it's all about. Here he says, then, he quotes this, Paul does, he quotes and says, behold upon the mountains the feet announcing good news and reporting peace. So this was a quotation by Paul. And then it continues, solemnize, O Judah, your holidays. So now it goes down to Judah from Israel, which will, and Nineveh, which is destroyed, which destroyed Israel. So this book here would be someplace towards the end of Israel, the beginning of Judah, probably. Render your vows, for in no way should they proceed any longer to go through you, for they should have grown old. The end of them, basically, is what he's saying there. The next video seminar, we continue in Nahum, more about the destruction of Nineveh. Hope you'll join us in chapter 2. Until then, God bless.